Welcome, everyone, to Mud, Blood, and Mother's Milk, our podcast series on slavery in San Antonio. Today, I'm delighted to introduce you to a wonderful student, Eugenio Gonzalez, who has been working on what has been always known as the Callahan Expedition. Eugenio is a political science major who's now a senior. Am I correct in that, Eugenio? You
Junior.
A junior, yep, and he's a history minor. He has been nominated for the STMU Research Scholar Prize this semester, but he also has been a paid student scholar for a major project on Methodist women in the borderlands, and he delivered, uh, among his other accomplishments, a talk to the Mexican Revolution Symposium at UNAM in downtown San Antonio, all in Spanish. So bilingual and a lot of experience in historical research. We're delighted to have you today, Eugenio, sharing your research on the Callahan Expedition.
Thank you for having me. Yes, my project is about the Callahan Expedition. As many will ask themselves, what is the Callahan Expedition? So, to summarize it in a quick way, the Callahan's expedition is like it was an expedition when James Callahan was hired and he ran into Piedras Negras and burned the city down. But there's many theories of why that happened. What was the cause of that? So many believe that it was because he was combating Native Americans. Others believe that it was because he was hired to recapture enslaved people, and so that's the purpose of of my project is to find what it's like the true or what can be like a lead for each one of those versions or yeah. And also I would like to like emphasize or highlight the role that San Antonio played in that raid, as it basically started here in San Antonio, as many people from Beer Canny volunteered to participate in that raid.
Excellent. Thank you so much for helping us understand the major role of San Antonio in this history.
Yes, and also I would like to highlight again that it was like an international conflict. It was not only like a local dispute or local grievances. It also reached into like Washington and into the federal Mexican government. Even the United States had to like repay Mexico for that
Mhm.
event. So yeah, it's also that important.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we're ready to see what you got. We're ready to
Yeah,
hear what you learned.
thank you. Let me start with my
I'll let you share your screen.
yes. Can you see it or
Not yet.
okay? Let me see.
Yeah, just hover your cursor down toward the bottom and see if there's a spot where
Okay,
it says
allow.
share. There we go.
Okay,
Now it's coming.
there we go.
Excellent. Nice. Okay.
Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so my project is it's in sections. So my first section is like what was being said in the US media or what was being covered. So in my first section, here, for example, here they're saying that like okay, so Callahan was hired, but he was hired to like combat Native Americans, but they use another language for that. So as you can see,
Excellent. Yeah, we can see well.
so yeah, I don't want to pronounce that word.
Mm-hmm.
And now, yeah, so they were so Beer Canny and like the community along here, they were having like trouble with like with Native Americans. That's what was being like covered. They even like I think they even did like some like not committees but like some like government gatherings to like do something about it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what was like the issue that they were like playing to be. So
That was
in
the
this
pretext.
second,
Yeah.
yeah, that was like the pretext as you said. So in this second one, um, it just tells you why. Sorry, it tells you like how many men from Beer County, Hayes, and Guadalupe participated and like even like volunteered to participate in the expedition. So here it tells you like it was 150 men, but it is more probably that it was around 111 or 112, 112.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so here like they crossed the Rio Grande, went into Mexico, but
And it says how many were
Native
killed. Looks like
Americans,
4 killed and several wounded.
yeah, and yeah, I will cover that like more later in the other sections. Okay, in this one, it tells you like why Callahan was selected, why he was the man for the job. So I
Mm-hmm.
think they selected him because like he was known for his like mm, service in the borderlands, and because he was known for his abilities to get jobs done. So here you can see Captain Callahan was selected to command this company on account of his frequent service upon the frontier and his known prudence and discretion in the execution of his duty, and also his character. So they painted him like, oh, he's this like tough man, or like he's the guy who's gonna like save us from these attacks of Native Americans.
And also, they seem to be saying, and because of his high character, then we know that he didn't have any other object. So they sound like that they already know that he's being accused of being a slave raider and a slave catcher. And they're trying to pretend like, oh no, he would never do anything illegal or immoral
Yeah,
like that. So good. Thank you. That's a great source.
yeah, yeah. And also part of that narrative, they were saying like, oh, the Mexican officials and the government and even like citizens, they're offering their services and they're like open for us to like go and get like Native Americans or like uh enslaved people. So for example, here it says the alcalde at Piedras Negras, which that means the mayor of Piedras Negras for those who know Spanish, gave Captain Callahan written permission to cross the Rio Grande, which he said to have exhibited to the commander for Duncan. The Mexican professed to be anxious to cooperate with the Texans in the campaign, aided them in crossing, and did all they could to deceive and betray them. So now they shifted to this idea that like, oh, the Mexicans betrayed us, so now we have like we have to now act. So here again, more of this narrative that Callahan and the that Callahan and his men were attacked by the Mexicans and the Native Americans. So now they had to like um, retreat, and like go. So they now went into Piedras Negras so they could like protect themselves. So they occupied that. So during that moment, they started to burn Piedras Negras and raid the city, and so they could escape.
Yeah, to secure a safe retreat. It looked like it was just a military requirement, not any kind of depredations on their part. Good. Thank you. That's a great
Yeah,
document too.
and also
All
here
right.
more of yeah, and also yeah, it continues with that theory that his report showed that that he
Fire.
crossed the he crossed the Rio Grande in pursuit of Native Americans again.
Good.
So here, like it's like this, like justification, like oh yes, he was attacked, so he had his right to do so, and they escaped.
Nice. That's an excellent job presenting the Anglo perspective on it.
Yeah. So in this second section, I will talk more about the Tejano narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Tejano narrative, I mean, it's really similar to the Anglo one, but the difference is it's the tone or like the delivery is not that biased or that towards like the Anglo side.
Yeah.
It's more into like the middle, more like neutral.
Mm-hmm.
So in here, it's like a report saying that oh, Callahan went into Piedras Negras, but he had like the permission of the Piedras Negras mayor, and even like Mexicans uh, offered their assistance. So
Mm-hmm.
you can see here, llegados al Águila recibieron manifestaciones de interés de parte del alcalde de Piedras Negras y de los vecinos del río, quienes les prometieron auxilios de dinero y hombres para ayudar a su empresa, que era atacar el campo nativos americanos formados cerca de San Fernando. So here
Mhm.
they're saying like the mayor of Piedras Negras and citizens, they even offer their money and men to help Callahan's company to fight Native Americans.
Yeah, and they never got any of that kind of credit in the Anglo versions. I noticed that they were offering money um and men.
That's correct. Yes. So here in this one, I think it talks about when he goes back, when he retreats and goes to Piedras Negras. So here says, let's see, okay, so he goes into Piedras Negras. Then, okay, I like this. For me, this caught my attention a lot. This last paragraph. El capitán en su manifiesto de queja y conducta a los mexicanos dice que los atacaron y convidaron a cruzar el río con la fuerza. So they basically saying here that they got backstabbed by the Mexicans. So they're saying that Callahan was um how can I say it dissatisfied or not upset, but he didn't like it basically.
Yeah.
In that sense. So yeah, he was like saying that all the Mexicans backstab us. So I don't like how they conducted themselves. So just more like that personal level of
Yeah,
report.
and that they were they were treated as enemies.
Yeah. Let's see. So now we come here to the Fort Duncan. It's believed that the Fort Duncan, they helped Callahan and his men come back. So here it talks about how soldiers of Fort Duncan fighted the Native Americans and the Mexicans. So, for example, los americanos se establecieron en Piedras Negras donde se fortificaban, aguardando a momento a otro el ataque de las fuerzas de mexicanas y de los nativos. So yeah, it was they were the train going back to the U.S. So they were attacking the Mexicans and Native American forces.
Mhm. Yeah, and so now we see that even official U.S. soldiers are firing on Mexico and on Mexicans. So it that makes it an even more important international incident because American soldiers can't fire on another country without a declaration of war. That's highly illegal. So
Yeah,
yeah, that shows how important your project is.
yeah. It goes from like it shifts from like this like citizen movement to like more like a army or like governmental like issue because like as you say, it's not the same having like a random citizen going to Mexico and do whatever they want and cause damage to another foreign country
Mhm.
and like having U.S. Army or military do something against the
Attacking.
sovereignty of a country.
And they're firing on Mexican soldiers too. It's not
Yeah,
just Mexican citizens. So yeah, it's American soldiers firing on Mexican soldiers when the no war has been declared. So that's highly illegal, which is why the U.S. had to pay for this.
so
Okay.
I was surprised by this text or this newspaper article or fragment. So it was saying that Callahan like so requested aid to the for Duncan General,
Yeah.
and he rejected it. Like, no, I'm not gonna help you.
Yeah. Because it was illegal. He wanted, what did he want? He wanted, let's see, llegaron las fuerzas mexicanas que contaban. So 300 Mexicans are coming. No hicieron ninguna tentativa de ataque. Um, el río sin ser maltratado. Se dice que la desdicha. Oh yeah, and the whole city was burned down. It was just
Yeah,
a pile of ruins.
and that's when they
Okay.
start talking about how Piedras Negras was burned. But
Yeah.
also here in the first part of the article segment, here it talks about el día siguiente recibió una comunicación del capitán Callahan solicitando su protección, la que negó el comandante. So he rejected
Yeah.
his like
Yeah, we're not getting involved in this. Now, here's what's interesting is, so they were firing to cover their escape, but they didn't give them any protection or sanctuary. The thing is that if you notice in the Anglo documents, at no point do they talk about how badly damaged Piedras Negras was. They don't say, wow, it was reduced to ruins and the whole unfortunate town was burned to the ground. Never do they acknowledge the full damage done. So excellent point also on that, as well as that the fort commander refused to give them sanctuary. Good. That was a good document.
So this last part of the Tejano narrative and media coverage is just telling us. So just telling us that we don't know why they burned Piedras Negras, but we hope that that it doesn't like affect the relationship with Mexico. And yeah, so for example, he'll see
Funestas, que no de lugar a represalias funestas. Okay. So yeah, they said that we think that that was a useless and illegitimate strategy. Fue una medida inútil and atrevida. So they're not supporting this press. This is not supporting what Callahan's expedition did. And they're just saying, boy, I hope the people of Mexico along the border don't attack Americans because they're not, the regular, ordinary citizens because it's not their fault. So they realize that Mexicans are going to be really mad.
So now into my other part of my project. So in this
section 3, good.
Yeah, sorry. I discussed about like the Mexico's coverage and the reaction. So here we have like a transcript of Governor Vidaurri of Nuevo León and Coahuila. He's like expressing his sentiment of being upset with governmental of U.S. official Murray. I don't know if it's spelled correct or pronounced correctly.
Yeah.
So he's like telling him, so we're not happy with what happened. So sobre un asunto que directamente afecta tanto la dignidad de la nación mexicana y la integridad de su territorio como el buen nombre y responsabilidad moral del gobierno de los Estados Unidos. So yeah, he's basically telling us you guys are tempting against our sovereignty and like our moral and
you're violating international law.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's making a major case out of it.
Yeah, and he talks about like usando de su derecho de las fuerzas con la fuerza y compilan con haber de rechazar un ultraje en su visión.
Yeah, it's like para un acto tan directo de agresión. This is a direct act of aggression. This isn't. This isn't.
He tells you 200 men.
And we promised aid. This is you guys are invading us and insulting our sovereignty.
Yeah. So that was a narrative at first, like, okay, why are we being like attacked or being invaded again? So that was like the narrative in Mexico.
Yeah.
So in here, let me see. This is more of it, but here they now mention Fort Duncan. Los actos que se acaban de mencionar llegaba al punto incendiando la tropa mexicana el comandante del fuerte Duncan. And here also talks about how he took over Piedras Negras, lo hallado repasado al río, al frente del fuerte Duncan y posesionando al mismo tiempo de Piedras Negras que incendió y redujo a cenizas. So here Vidar is telling him, so Piedras Negras was burned down to the ground, there's nothing left, and there was also like some involvement of the people of Fort Duncan.
Excellent.
And here's the first evidence that we have that they're talking about freedom seekers. So
yeah.
Que una junta de
una junta de ciudadanos de Béjar
se dirigió al comando.
Yeah, so translate this for everybody.
Yeah. So
and show us your cursor so we can see where you're reading.
Yeah.
If you can put your cursor on it so that we can follow you along. This is very important stuff.
So let me see.
So group of citizens of Bexar County
went to the army base or like the commanding center in Coahuila and ask for there's enslaved, and they
The
also like
prófugos, that means runaway slaves.
yeah, and train them to
Mandar
if they
por
were not returned, that they were gonna like respond through
mandar por ellos, that we're gonna send somebody to get them if they
yeah.
weren't handed over. And we hear also the response of the same commander denying this demand with irrefutable reason logic, and that he doesn't have the authority anyway to resolve the case, and that has to be determined between the two nations. And so, yeah, he's saying no, por haber profesado México el principio, the Mexicans have declared el principio de la libertad de los esclavos. We have declared the principle of freedom of for slaves and abolition of slavery since we became independent. So we can't be handing over runaway slaves because they are free in Mexico, is what he's saying. Yeah, this is a terrific find here. So, yeah, so that this whole thing went down only a couple days before, it says, the expedition. So clearly they're feeling like they're going to shed Mexican blood. And under the pretext of punishing the atrocities committed by the indigenous peoples, which do who have also been granted sanctuary in Mexico. Good.
Yeah, let me go here, advance here. Let's see what we have. So here, it's how like they returned. Like there were more expeditions, but now they were like, no, now we're like prepared. Now we're gonna have like more men in the borders. That's what Mexico said. So let me see.
Hacer y porque han encontrado ya la frontera cubierta con más de 2,000 hombres que vino habrá mandado. Bueno. Wait, can I see the top part? We're trying to figure out if Americans que volvieron a venir por Garrido y Ivy no se han atrevido a hacerlo por la puerta. So he said, yeah. So more Americans who came to try and invade us haven't dared because, as you said, of the strong lesson they learned, the others learned in Piedras Negras, and because the border has been covered with more than 2,000 men whom Vidaurri has sent, and good artillery. So yeah, good. Oh, what does it say about San Antonio down at the...
Yeah, I was gonna go there. No obstante que en San Antonio de Béjar se habían presentado más de 1,000 hombres pidiendo armas a la autoridad con el pretexto de venir a perseguir a los nativos americanos que están en el territorio mexicano, quejándose de que se pasan a hacer daño al territorio americano y no es difícil que con este protesta los tengamos pronto encima.
Yeah. So 1,000 men
that,
in San Antonio. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and Canny were asking for like arms or weapons to combat Native Americans that were going into the U.S. and causing them problems. So they were like, "Oh, they give us like arms so we can take action into our
More
hands."
than 1,000 men. Yeah, more than 1,000
Yeah.
men in San Antonio are asking for this for weapons so that they can go after the Indians ostensibly, but of course, the real thing is the slave catching part, which they can get a reward for. So yeah, that's in other words, yeah, they didn't learn the lesson. They just decided to up the numbers.
So yeah, now in this section, it's a really quick one. I just talked about how the U.S. and Mexico created a committee of claims, and then in here it was when the U.S. had to pay Mexico for the Piedras Negras case. Cases you can see belong to the class of claims
Yeah, and
known
look
as
at
the
that.
Piedras.
900, almost 1,000 claims were made on the part of Mexicans. Only 167 were allowed, and
Yeah,
of those,
150.
150 belonged to the Piedras Negras case. So the only claims that the U.S. was even willing to recognize mostly were these Piedras Negras cases. Yeah,
And here's the amount that they
the
paid.
amount $150,000 for burning the whole town. Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
Excellent research on this thing. Nobody's even heard of it in San Antonio, so this is a major contribution.
thank you, thank you. Hopefully, can help future research. So in this section, I discuss more about who participated in the expedition. So here are the names that I was able to find. So here says that W.H. Clumpton, Alice Smith, Willis Jones, H.R. Holland, John Gregor.
Those were
And
the ones who died, those four.
yeah,
And then
those
injured
four.
were, yeah, and John Gregor was fatally wounded.
Yeah. And here's Captain Nathan, I don't know if that's it, Benson, Henry B. King, then Patton, and I don't know how you pronounce this.
Eustace
Eustace
Benton.
Benson. Okay. And
So
yeah,
2
those,
lightly injured and 1 seriously injured,
yes.
1 fatally injured. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were injured. Of those, 1 seriously, 1 fatally, and the other 3 lightly.
Yes. So here in the second one, it's more of the same, but it gives you a little bit more of who they were.
Mm-hmm.
So W. Jones reported killed, the son of Judge W.F. Jones, and Benton, son of Captain Benton, who was wounded, was a relative of Colonel Benton of Missouri. So that they in this one, it just gives you those 2 names.
Yeah. And look, they're saying, yeah, the Mexicans going to complain about it being lawless, and our government will probably prosecute the Rangers for violating neutrality laws. But we thought it was justified. So that's back to the
Yeah,
Anglo thing.
perspective.
And notice they're identifying these also as Texas Rangers. It's not just an ordinary group of citizens.
Yeah.
Good. Let's go.
And here is a description of William Henry. I want to believe he's the grandson of Patrick Henry, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken,
he is.
the American Revolution hero.
Right.
So here's just a description, but I think the important one is here in the Mexican.
Wait, can we go up to Bob Augustine? So Bob Augustine was such a bad guy that he ended up being hanged. He was a white guy who ended up being hanged in downtown San Antonio for all the bad stuff he did. And Henry was so bad also that he ended up being shot down on Main Plaza in 61, I think. Yeah, so this is a rough bunch here.
So here
Good.
in the Mexican media, here's first the headline: Derrota de los Tejanos e incendio de Piedras Negras por esto. So the Texans were defeated, but Piedras Negras was burned because of them. It's what it says, the headline. So now here's like where Henry it's named, or like it's called por las cartas que escribe uno de esos bandidos llamado el Capitán Henry. Se impondrá de que alegan de haber pasado el río en persecución de los nativos americanos y que vienen apoyados por las fuerzas de los Estados Unidos. Y la conducta del comandante del fuerte lo comprueba bastante.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so they're claiming they're coming in, alegan that they're coming in hot pursuit of indigenous people, but that's very much a suspect claim.
Yeah, and also
Nice.
they're talking about how Fort Duncan was involved in that.
Yeah,
also.
and also that William Henry is a bandit. He's recognized as a bad player. Nice.
Okay, let's see. So here's my finding sections. So here in this Anglo media, I found about the Know Nothing movement.
Mhm.
So here, in the face of all these facts, showing the necessity of protection to the frontier, of the determination of the people to protect, and of voluntary contributions of citizens to furnish supplies, the state gazette persists in calling the movement a filibuster know nothing movement, intimidating that the whole matter has had its origin in a design to pander party interest.
Oh,
So in this article, it's also talking before it's talking about how people here in San Antonio marched in support of Callahan.
okay.
So that's why they're talking about the Know Nothing movement.
Okay, good. All right. So yeah, it's being politically discredited, but yeah, it's apparently affiliated with the Know Nothing movement. Good. Okay, good.
So in here, it talks about how they wanted to get back the enslaved. Deseamos saber qué se puede hacer para recobrar, I'm not gonna say that word, fugitivos en México pertenecientes a ciudadanos de Texas. Es un negocio de la mayor importancia para Texas y mandamos al portador de esta con el único objetivo de saber y obtener su opinión de una manera tan esencial y esperamos que verdad tendrá la voluntad de contestar las siguientes preguntas. ¿Puede hacer algo sobre este negocio y cuándo el número de fugitivos que puedan ser recobrados, la suma que se debe pagar por cada fugitivo puede estar al otro lado del Río Grande y en qué lugar?
So
El
they're
modo
actually
como
trying to
se...
bribe Mexico. They're offering money to get
Yeah,
enslaved people back.
yeah. How
And
we can,
Mexico's still not going for it.
yeah, how can we like,
Can we pay you?
yeah, how can we
How
agree
much?
to, yeah,
So that makes it even more to Mexico's credit that they refused to give them back when they could have, somebody could have gotten money for it. That's being offered. Yeah, good.
yeah. Let me see. So here again, like Burke County citizens were requesting for their,
Oh, yeah. And here they're saying, and other criminals.
yeah,
Ellos
let
se
me see.
prestan voluntariamente en hacer otro tanto con sus negros y otros. Yeah. They're claiming con el robo de black people introduciendo unos tantos despreciables. Okay, yeah. This is an intense find too.
Yeah. For me, what caught my attention is like the language they use towards freedom seekers.
Very negative. Bexar County
Yeah,
citizens are
here,
requesting. It's like, look, unos tantos despreciables. These are very dangerous and despised people. What are you doing giving them sanctuary? Yeah, they're
yeah,
trying
and
to
also,
make scare Mexico.
yeah, and also like que repito, les son más gravosos que útiles. So, I mean that
Lo,
kind of language also.
repito, los son más gravosos. Yeah, that they're more dangerous to you than they are useful.
Yeah,
So they're trying to scare Mexico into either bribe them into we'll give you money to get them back, or scare them into, oh my gosh, if you give them sanctuary, they're going to rise up and hurt you. And yeah, so
yeah,
it's
they're
excellent.
they're running like this like fear campaign also.
Mm-hmm.
In this one, I found a letter from Governor Peace, who supported the movement, but um, but has told him like, yeah, you were able to like go into Mexico. I mean, you had the right to go into Mexico and either come back the Native Americans, or but you didn't have like the right to burn down Piedras Negras and take the possessions of the citizens of Piedras Negras.
Yeah. Yeah, and it might be Pease. You'll have to look at that. I think it might be Pease, the governor, but that's
Yeah,
a wonderful find, the letter from the governor who theoretically ordered the expedition. He's trying to say, oh, wait a minute. No, it's not my fault. You guys did the wrong thing. He's washing his hands. of it.
Yeah.
Good find.
Yeah, and he's more like my merits and my flaws of
Okay.
my future
Yeah.
research.
Good. Well, the merits are that you are getting sources from all kinds of perspectives, stuff that people have never found before. Um, and yeah, it is a limitation that we just don't know who those freedom seekers are, who is it that is over there.
Yeah.
But they came back with nobody. They didn't get Mexico defended its enslaved people. And future research continues to look at the question of whether they really were trying to combat Native Americans or recapture
Freedom seekers.
good. Nice. Thank you so much. Appreciate your work, Eugenio.
Yeah.
And boy, if I ever get funding, we'll let you keep working on it because your bilingual abilities have really helped us bring new sources. There was a recent book published on this by one of Captain Callahan's descendants, but of course he did not have any of these sources. So very grateful to you for bringing some new light on the subject. Thank you so much. And
no, thank you, and I'm happy that I was able to bring some contribution to this project and to history overall.
thank you, Eugenio.
Thank you.
All right.